Of all the terrible luck, or maybe it was fate, I had barely stepped foot in the motel when everything started to unravel. After months of persuasion and weeks of wrestling with my conscience, I had finally made the decision. I was going to have an affair. Or at least, that was the closest word I could find, though it didn't quite fit. Words like cheating or infidelity felt cheap, sordid, and that wasn't what this was. Not at all. On Lily's recommendation, I had booked a luxurious corner suite in an upscale hotel, complete with an adjoining room for extra privacy. Her exact words were, "You'll need it, things will get loud." That single reservation had nearly drained the savings from the secret account I had been carefully building for months. I had set it up using my work address, diverting a small portion of my pay raise into it with every paycheck. Even now, as I stood in that room, my mind still resisted the reality of what I was about to do. My conscience gnawed at me even though Lily had spent weeks reassuring me that this was something different. This wasn't the usual affair, one woman, one man, where the thrill lay more in the deception than the experience itself. No, this was something else entirely. This was me, one woman, with two men, handpicked, personally vetted, and even tested by Lily herself. According to her, these men weren't just well-equipped, they were skilled, experienced, and knew exactly what they were doing. That was what finally broke down my resistance. Even without Lily's colorful descriptions, my own imagination had painted enough vivid pictures to leave me breathless with anticipation. In fact, just setting up that hidden account had given me a thrill of its own. And now I was here. I had barely exchanged introductions with James and Thomas before they got right to business, no hesitation, no awkward small talk. And it was everything I had imagined, every fantasy I had let play out in my head. Until my phone rang. My husband's ringtone. Not now. Please, not now. There was no way I could ignore it. Shoving the men aside, I grabbed my phone and answered. Dave sounded awful. He had gotten sick at work and was heading straight home. He needed me to call in a favor to get him a doctor's appointment as soon as possible, a perk of being married to a medical receptionist. I promised I'd take care of it and told him I'd see him soon. Which left me in a disaster of a situation. I was in a high-end hotel room just 15 minutes from home, drenched in sweat and carrying the undeniable scent of intimacy. Meanwhile, my husband was 25 minutes away and counting. My pulse spiked with panic as I scrambled to grab my belongings, muttering a quick excuse to James and Thomas before bolting for the elevators. Once in my car, I immediately called the clinic and secured an appointment for Dave in an hour. Speeding home, I pulled into our driveway just 4 minutes before he arrived. And when I saw him, I knew he looked terrible. And now I had a new problem. I needed to stay far away from him. One whiff and he would know. I had managed to fix my smudged makeup in the car, but that wouldn't be enough. The scent clung to my skin, my hair. I was already on edge, my nerves shot, and this so-called adventure had turned out to be far more stressful than I had anticipated. But then Dave, always the thoughtful one, solved my problem for me. He insisted on going to the doctor alone, worried about exposing me to whatever illness he had. Typical Dave. So I played my part. As we sat together, making small talk like we did every day, I pretended to be completely at ease. I told him I had been home all afternoon, taking it easy after finishing work early, waiting for Lily to come over for our usual afternoon run. All the while, I kept my distance. Dave had a sharp nose. More than once, he had commented on slight changes in my perfume, my lotion, even my shampoo. I used his sickness as an excuse to sit farther away, avoiding his touch. Then another curveball. Dave asked to take my car. He said it would be easier to drive than his bulky SUV while feeling this miserable. For just a fraction of a second, I hesitated. Just long enough to make my stomach drop. Then, forcing my best casual smile, I handed him my keys. As soon as he left, panic hit me all over again. The temperature gauge. The lingering scent in the car. The bag in the trunk. I had packed a small bag with a change of clothes and toiletries, just in case. And now it was sitting right there in the car my husband was about to drive. All this for less than 5 minutes of pleasure. And now I was drowning in anxiety. One thing was certain, if I made it through this without getting caught, I would never do it again. No thrill, no excitement was worth the risk of losing my marriage. I had worked too hard, endured too many awful relationships before finally finding a man like Dave. And yet, that kiss had been unforgettable. No distractions. I had a situation to handle. First, I needed an excuse for the warm engine. Grabbing Dave's spare keys, I jumped into his SUV and drove straight to the local deli. Standing in the checkout line, I ran through every possible scenario in my head, making sure I had covered all my tracks. Then it hit me. My rings. I always fidgeted with them when I was nervous. But as I reached for them this time, my fingers brushed against bare skin. Oh no. I had taken them off before stepping into the hotel. And they were still sitting in the ashtray of my car. The very same car that Dave was now driving. A wave of unease settled in my stomach, twisting into a tight knot. The moment I stepped through the front door, I wasted no time. I set a pot of chicken soup on the stove, making sure the house smelled warm and welcoming. I needed to play the role of the devoted wife perfectly. Next, I moved quickly to the fridge, grabbed an egg, and cracked it open, carefully smearing a bit of the raw egg white onto my ring finger. My allergy to raw egg would soon leave my skin irritated and red. An undeniable excuse for why I wasn't wearing my wedding rings. Satisfied with the illusion, I scrubbed my hands thoroughly and turned my focus to the next issue. My underwear. It was still damp, and the reason why made a chill run down my spine. Pushing the thought aside, I buried it deep within the laundry pile, ensuring it wouldn't be found. Needing to wash everything away, I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water soothe me. The adjustable shower head was my saving grace, and within 5 minutes, I was completely refreshed. Clean, dressed, and back in control, I turned off the stove and glanced at the clock. Where was Dave? He had been gone for nearly an hour. Right on cue, I heard my car pull into the driveway. Moments later, Dave stumbled inside, looking even worse than when he left, and collapsed onto the couch. And despite everything, despite the gnawing guilt, the secrets, I still loved him deeply. Always had. From the moment we met 7 years ago, I had been drawn to him. He wasn't just breathtakingly handsome, tall, muscular, the kind of man who turned heads effortlessly, but he had a sharp mind and an unshakable drive. He had his sights set on a future, and somehow, in the midst of all that, he had chosen me. In the early days, I couldn't believe it. He seemed so out of my league, but he pursued me with relentless charm, breaking down every doubt I had. His proposal wasn't a surprise, but it was still one of the happiest moments of my life. I had been upfront with him from the beginning, warning him that my medical history might make it difficult for me to conceive. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't even blinked. And in return, he had confided in me, admitting that he had a temper. He rarely lost control, but when he did, it was all-consuming. He once told me about a night in his early 20s when he had stepped in to stop an attack in a dark alley. 3 men against 1 woman. Without a second thought, he had put himself between them. When they pushed back, his fury took over. One of the attackers had run. Another had his jaw shattered in multiple places. The last never left the hospital alive. A coroner later ruled it as death by misadventure, but Dave had no recollection of the fight, only the blinding rage. That was the man I married. A protector. A good man. A man who had never given me a reason to doubt him. And yet today, I had almost betrayed him. For what? I exhaled slowly, the weight of my choices settling over me. I had been lucky today. Whatever force was watching over me had granted me a second chance, and I wasn't about to waste it. But where had it all started? January. That was when the 2 smooth-talking manipulators slithered into Lily's life and, by extension, mine. It had happened at a New Year's Eve party. 2 men with practiced charm zeroed in on Lily, keeping her glass full, pulling her in with their effortless confidence. By the time the night was over, they made her an offer. Both of them together a package deal. And with her inhibitions lowered, she took the bait. The next few weeks were filled with endless stories. Every time we met, Lily gushed about the experience, describing it in a way that made it sound like something more than just indulgence. She spoke about it like it was a revelation, something life-changing. And for the first time, I listened with more than casual curiosity. Because Lily wasn't just talking about something enjoyable. She was talking about something better than anything I had ever known. At some point, I made the mistake of admitting that. By then, her view on relationships had changed completely. She told me that traditional intimacy, one-on-one connection, wasn't enough anymore. It didn't excite her. She had moved beyond that, diving into a lifestyle where variety was the thrill. 2 men at a time every other week. Sometimes more. And after my small confession, the pressure began. Every time she had a new story, she pushed harder, making it seem like I was depriving myself, that I was missing out on something extraordinary. It was a slow, steady erosion of my defenses. Then, one day, during an otherwise normal conversation, she said it, "Olivia, I truly believe every woman owes it to herself to be absolutely spoiled by multiple men at least once in her life." I recognized what she was doing immediately. I laughed, brushing it off, and made my stance clear. I had too much to lose. She had nothing on the line, while my marriage was everything. And I didn't just reject the idea, I made it clear I had no respect for cheaters. Those selfish, thoughtless people who destroyed their partners for the sake of a fleeting thrill. I had nothing but contempt for them. Looking back, I now realize that conversation only gave Lily the ammunition she needed. She knew exactly how to manipulate me after that. Over the next few months, she shifted her strategy. She began reframing everything, twisting words to make it seem like it wasn't really cheating. Sleeping with another man? That was betrayal. Falling in love with someone else? Absolutely, that was unforgivable. But a little excitement with two married men? That wasn't a threat to my marriage. It was a right I had been denying myself. And like a fool, I didn't shut her down. I should have. I should have walked away right then and there, cut her out of my life completely. But I didn't, because I enjoyed talking about it. The allure, the rush, the sheer thrill of it all filtered through Lily's vivid stories. And truth be told, Dave unknowingly benefited from those conversations as well. More than once, he'd playfully grumble about how I would ambush him the moment he stepped inside. Oddly enough, he never really resisted. At the pace we were going, I was certain that the baby we had been hoping for would be on the way any day now. Sensing that I was teetering on the edge of believing a threesome wasn't truly a betrayal, Lily took a different approach. "If your only real concern is the fallout of an affair," she said one afternoon, "then no harm is done if Dave never finds out." First, I laughed it off. But when she offered to dig into the details, I didn't object. The truth was, the entire subject fascinated me, and as a result, my nights with Dave had become more intense, more passionate. What I failed to notice was that somewhere along the way, something had shifted. I still loved my husband, and our moments together were fulfilling, but not in the same way they once were. It was like restoring an old classic car. No matter how much effort or money you put into making it run smoother or drive better, it would never be a luxury sports car. 3 weeks later, Lily presented me with what she called the guide to not getting caught. First, I assumed it was a joke, but playing along felt exhilarating in a strange way. For the next several days, we hardly even went on our regular runs, too preoccupied with analyzing every angle of her carefully crafted plan. Every risk was accounted for, health precautions to avoid unwanted surprises, strategies to steer clear of suspicious situations, even the logistics of selecting the perfect location. A hotel near a shopping center was ideal, somewhere I'd have a valid reason to be. A different name for the reservation, a disguise if necessary. Every bit of physical evidence meticulously erased, always allowing extra time before heading home. Lily even suggested setting an alarm as a hard stop to avoid getting lost in the moment. With the groundwork laid, she handled the arrangements, booking the place, managing the logistics, ensuring there were no digital traces left behind. No texts, no emails, nothing that could be tracked. My only responsibility was to show up. Somewhere in the process, Lily stopped referring to the husband and the wife in general terms. Instead, she started using our names Olivia and Dave. But what her so-called foolproof guide failed to account for was the most unpredictable factor of all, guilt. From everything I had read, guilt was what unraveled people. It made them act differently, slip up, draw attention to themselves. Guilt was what got them caught. So for 6 weeks I trained myself, conditioned my thoughts, prepared for what was coming. By the time I finally agreed, I meant it. "I just want to experience it once in my life," I told Lily. "I want to drive a Lamborghini." She was beyond thrilled. The following week, we locked in the perfect date, one of my half days at work. Then came the next step, selecting my partners. Lily had a whole mental catalog to choose from, and I eventually settled on James and Thomas. She arranged everything, outlining strict ground rules. No marks, no scratches, no visible proof that anything had ever happened. If either of them crossed the line, she assured me they'd never get another chance. By the time Friday arrived, anticipation buzzed in my veins. Not guilt, not fear, just pure, unfiltered excitement. Between Sunday and Thursday, I had thrown myself at Dave twice the moment he walked through the door. I even told him I was ovulating again to justify my insatiable energy. But Friday? Friday was something else entirely. I had to force myself to obey the speed limit on the way to the hotel. I parked near the shopping center, nearly sprinting toward the rendezvous point. My heart pounded so hard I barely noticed the fact that my wig almost flew off in the rush. And when I stepped inside and saw James and Thomas waiting, I was impressed. Lily had impeccable taste. Everything was falling into place. And then my phone rang. Dave. That call changed everything. In an instant, I realized what Lily's carefully curated guide had completely ignored: fate. Because no matter how well you plan, no matter how cautious you are, life has a way of throwing you off course. That weekend, I spent my time tending to my sick husband. And for the first time, I was truly grateful for fate's intervention. I had come dangerously close to throwing everything away. And I wasn't about to let that happen again. By Monday, my mind was made up. I went to work as usual, but Lily was unreachable, so I sent her a text: "We'll talk Monday." That afternoon, Dave was feeling better. He even made us lunch. At exactly 3:30, Lily finally texted back. "So? How was it? Was it as amazing as I promised?" I exhaled slowly, then typed out my response: "We need to talk." And by the time we finally did, I already knew my decision. Never again. Olivia usually made it a point to leave before Dave got home, but that night, we lost track of time. She was still at the table while I stood by the coffee machine. Dave walked in, greeting us both casually before heading straight toward me. Without hesitation, he kissed me deeply, deliberately. When he finally pulled away, he flashed an apologetic smile in Lily's direction. "Sorry, Lily. I just love her so much, I can't help myself." Lily's face drained of color. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze shifting away like she couldn't bear to look. To ease the tension, Dave insisted she stay for dinner. And the entire night, he never let go of me. He touched me, held me, stayed close constantly. That wasn't normal behavior for him. Lily's visit left both of us unsettled. By the time she finally walked out the door, Dave didn't waste a second. That night, he went out of his way to make me feel cherished. I had to admit, whatever fears I'd been harboring about him becoming emotionally distant vanished. If anything, his attention proved the exact opposite. The following morning, I woke up to find that Dave had already left for work. A note on the nightstand explained that something urgent had come up. My own shift started early, so I took a long shower, scrubbing away the night's warmth, and got ready for Lily's usual visit. But when she arrived, something was different. Instead of her usual running gear, she wore regular clothes, and a scarf was wrapped around her neck, even though the weather was mild. I frowned. "What's with the scarf?" She hesitated. "Oh, my neck's just a little stiff. Trying to keep it warm." Her voice was off. She looked exhausted. More than that, she seemed down. We made small talk, but she didn't perk up, didn't bring up a new plan the way she normally would. She just sat there, distracted. Finally, I had to address it. "Lily, are you okay? I figured you'd be ready for something exciting today." I flashed a grin, trying to lighten the mood. "Actually, I was thinking next Tuesday would work. Can you talk to James and Thomas about that little ring trick?" Her reaction was instant and unexpected. No, the word came out sharp, almost broken. I blinked in surprise as she suddenly shot up from her seat, her breathing uneven. But just as quickly, she dropped back down, her face pale. "No, Olivia," she said again, quieter this time. "I really don't think you should do it. I was wrong. I never should have suggested it." I stared at her, trying to make sense of this sudden change. "What's going on? You've spent months getting me excited about this, and now you're telling me not to." She wouldn't even meet my eyes. "I was wrong," she murmured. "I never should have put those ideas in your head. When I saw Dave kiss you the other night, when I saw how much he loves you, I realized I couldn't be part of ruining that." "Lily, it's not like he'd ever find out," I reasoned. "You wouldn't be breaking us up. You don't understand." She finally looked at me then, and there was something raw in her expression. "You have something rare, Olivia, a something 1 in 1,000. And you were right all along, it would be foolish to risk it. No matter how careful you think you are, there's always a chance you'll get caught." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She exhaled shakily. "I was caught." I froze. "What?" Lily swallowed hard, her voice unsteady. My ex-husband and our split wasn't amicable, Olivia. One day he came home early, completely unexpected. He called me, asked where I was, and like a fool, I told him I was at home. She let out a bitter laugh. He was waiting for me when I walked through the door, and just like that, he threw me out. I swallowed. But Lily, you won. You got the house, you get alimony. You have this thrilling, adventurous life. She shook her head. No, she whispered. I go out and do reckless things just to distract myself from how lonely I am. I would trade all of it. The house, the money, the so-called excitement, for just one more night of being held by Luke. Then, she broke down, sobbing into her hands. I moved toward her, wrapping my arms around her as she wept. But you made it sound so exciting, I murmured. A hollow laugh escaped her. Sometimes it is, she admitted. Other times, it's just awful. She hesitated, then confessed. A couple of months ago, I had a bad experience. The guys just used me. One of them was so rough, I barely escaped before his friend got a turn. I pulled back, horrified. Then why did you try to drag me into this? She wiped at her face, shaking her head. I don't know. Maybe I just didn't want to feel alone in it. Maybe I thought I could live through your stories instead of my own. But I was wrong, Olivia. So wrong. Her voice cracked. Please don't do it. Don't ruin your life like I did mine. And please, don't ask me to set you up with James and Thomas. It's not happening. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were desperate. And in that moment, I believed her. I promised. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't risk my marriage. Relief washed over Lily's face. A deep, genuine relief. We kept talking for a little while longer, steering the conversation toward safer topics. But something still felt off. At one point, I noticed her glancing around the room, her expression wary. Then, she abruptly stood up, grabbed the phone base, and flipped it over to examine the bottom before setting it back down. It was strange. Eventually, well before Dave was due home, she checked her watch and left. I sat there, a mixture of relief and confusion swirling inside me. Life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Lily continued her pursuits, but whenever I asked, she only shared the bad stories. More than once, she made me promise, again, that I wouldn't jeopardize my marriage. Socially, we were inseparable. Except when Dave was around. She avoided him entirely. I assumed it was guilt. Or maybe she just couldn't bear to see a happy couple anymore. The only real change I noticed in Dave was his new habit of disappearing into his study every evening for a little while after he got home. Other than that, he was the same as always. As for me, something had shifted. Without Lily's stories fueling my mind, my love with Dave felt different, less intense. That moment should have been my warning, the glaring red flag waving right in front of me. But I missed it entirely. When Dave got called away on an unexpected weekend trip and Lily backed out on our plans at the last minute, the stage was set. Perfect storm. That night I ended up at a bar. And I didn't go home alone. That was the night everything unraveled. The night I lost it all. Now, 11 years later, I found myself seated across from a police officer, back in the very town I had spent over a decade avoiding. So that makes you, what, 45? He asked, his voice carrying a trace of skepticism. I caught the way he looked at me, the subtle doubt in his eyes, and for some reason, I felt compelled to explain myself. Yeah, I know I look older, I admitted. 11 years of constantly watching your back, never being able to return home, never contacting anyone from your past. It wears on you. I let out a slow breath. And the guilt, that does its own kind of damage. Oh, so you finally managed to find some guilt? He remarked dryly. Yes, I admitted, but mostly for Dave. A lump formed in my throat just at the thought of him. I was the second long-term partner to betray him. First his fiancée, then me. After that, his chances of ever living a normal life were next to none. The officer leaned forward slightly. And what about Lily? I swallowed. We stuck to our plan, called each other on the first day of the next quarter. but she wasn't doing well. She left town so fast that she had no work references, no stability. She never said it outright, but from what I could piece together, she was doing whatever it took to survive. I hesitated. That was the last time I ever heard from her. 2 years later, with a bit of extra cash, I hired a private investigator. He traced her last known phone number to a lawyer's office. They told him it was part of a deceased estate. Nothing more. When he asked if I wanted to dig deeper, I refused. There was no need. I already knew. The officer studied me for a long moment before speaking. "And what exactly do you want from the police, ma'am?" I exhaled shakily. "I just got back to town. My mother is dying. I need someone to come with me to Dave's house, to make sure he understands I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to say goodbye to my mom." My voice dropped. "If Dave still wants to come after me after today, fine. I won't run anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "No husband? No boyfriend to go with you?" I let out a dry laugh. "Are you kidding? Living under a false identity, always too scared to make real friends because you know you'll have to disappear again within a year? That's not exactly ideal for relationships." I hesitated before adding, "There was one guy, about 7 years ago. He was different, special. But when I told him why I was always looking over my shoulder, he was gone within a week." The officer sighed and rubbed his jaw. "Highly unusual. But what the hell? Slow day." I sat rigidly in the patrol car as we drove through town. As we passed Lily's old street, I turned to look out the window. The house was gone. In its place, a block of modern apartments stood. "What happened there?" the officer asked. "It burned down," I said quietly. 10, maybe 11 years ago. By the time we pulled up to my old house, at least the one listed in the directory under Dave's name, my stomach was in knots. The officer undid the strap on his holster, positioning himself slightly to the side as I rang the doorbell. The familiar chime sent a ripple through my chest. It echoed in my bones. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and a child, 8 or 9 years old, unusually tall, with blonde hair and Dave's striking features, looked up at me. "Hello," I managed, my voice thin. "I'm looking for Dave Williams." The boy turned his head and called back into the house. "Mom, there's a lady here looking for Dad." My heart stopped. Inside, 2 smaller children played in the living room. Then, she appeared. A slim, beautiful woman, probably 5 years younger than me. The moment she saw me, she stiffened, pulling the boy behind her in a protective gesture. She didn't need me to introduce myself. She already knew. Her voice was cold. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize to Dave," I said carefully. Her expression remained unchanged. "I can assure you, my husband wants nothing to do with you. Seeing you will only bring back pain. Please leave." I swallowed hard. "Just tell him I'm staying at my mother's place. If he wants to get anything off his chest, yell at me, hit me, whatever, he can." She tilted her head slightly. "Why would he want to see you?" I frowned. "Because I know he's been looking for me for 11 years. Her face remained impassive. "You're wrong," she said calmly. "I've known Dave for nearly 11 years. We've been married for more than 9. And I can tell you, he never searched for you." I blinked. She continued, her voice steady. "I handle the finances. He's never hired a private investigator. Since his promotion to CO 9 years ago, he hasn't even left town without me." "I think you're mistaken." Her words struck me like a sledgehammer. Had I spent over a decade running from a ghost? Had I upended my entire life, changed my name, moved from city to city, just because I thought I saw his truck in my rearview mirror? She let out a quiet sigh. "Is that all? I need to get back to preparing dinner. Tonight, the cook has the night off." I barely acknowledged her words, my thoughts tangled in a whirlwind. As she turned away, I caught one last glimpse of the life she had built. A life that, deep down, I had once imagined as mine. A single tear slipped down each of my cheeks. Just as she reached the door, she hesitated. "If it's all the same to you, I won't even mention to Dave that you were here," she said softly. Then, after a brief pause, almost as an afterthought, she added, "He really did love you, you know." He waited an entire year hoping you'd come back. But when it became clear you wouldn't, I convinced him to file for abandonment. If he knew you were around now, it would only reopen wounds I worked so hard to help him heal. With that, she shut the door. The officer, who had remained silent until then, placed a gentle hand on my back and guided me away. My vision was blurred by tears, making it impossible to see clearly. That was the last time I ever saw Dave. 2 weeks later, I unexpectedly ran into Lily's sister. She told me about the letter Lily had left behind. In the end, she had been trapped. No financial security, no stability, and no way to escape. To cope, she had turned to anything that could numb the pain. And then, one night, burdened by the shame of what her life had become, knowing she could never truly leave her past behind, and living in constant fear that Dave might one day find her, she made her final decision. Just like that, she was gone. Her last words in that letter said everything. And at that moment I understood, if I had stayed, if I had followed through with it, if fate hadn't stepped in that day at the hotel, that could have been me. The next morning I left town. But this time it wasn't because I was running. There was simply nothing left to stay for. Subscribe and stay ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.